I'd like to discuss right now a little story about the importance of foundations and what's underneath them. And this is the story of the famous Leaning Tower of Pisa. Back in April of 2001, this article appeared in the magazine Engineering News Record about soil extraction saving the tower. It was a $25 million rescue mission, and it was intended to extend the tower's life by an estimated 300 years. The tower was built on 5 meters, roughly 15 feet of very silty soil over alternating layers of clay and sand. Had it not been for delays in construction, the tower would probably have collapsed at the very time it was built. Because it was built literally over centuries, the delays allowed the soil to consolidate and provide a little bit more stability than originally was there. The first period of construction was in the 12th century and lasted 5 years. No more construction was done until 100 years later, when another bout of activity started, at which point the tower started to lean to the south. So what the masons did was build a backward curve into the stonework to try to balance the lean and keep it vertical, basically making one side a little thicker than the other. Still another 100 years passed, and in the 14th century they had the final decade of construction in completing the bell tower. By that time, the lean was approximately 3.5 degrees from the vertical. Over the centuries, the tower continued to increase the lean. It had reached 5.4 degrees from vertical by 1911 and 5.5 degrees by 1990. That's the equivalent of 18 feet from vertical. So during this time, the tower had not only been sinking but rotating slowly, with the north toe rising. So as a temporary fix, 600 tons of lead ingots were stacked around the north side. Well, this was unsightly, and so they decided they would install ground anchors as a temporary fix. This required installing a pre-stressed concrete ring under the floor that would anchor these rods. And they would have to build it in short sections, with the soil being locally frozen to keep groundwater out while it was being built. However, while they were excavating the floor, they found some steel tubes that had been installed back in the 1930s with the intention of grouting the foundation, but they had been abandoned. But they had the result of connecting the floor with the tower. So when they initiated the ground freezing on the north end, it raised the floor. With this started the tower moving southward. Well, they stopped the ground freezing, allowed the soil to thaw, and the structure settled back down. So they figured if they froze the ground on the south side, then the tower would start tilting back toward the north. But instead, the tower kept tilting southward and kept moving. So now they considered something called soil extraction under the tower. What this did was to insert 41 inclined steel tubes underneath the south foundation. They inserted augers, basically drills, inside this casing and drilled holes, and then withdrew the auger, leaving a void. The weight of the tower collapsed the void, moving the tower lower and eliminating the tilt. Here is a view. You can see the size of the casings and the augers that were used. So as they continued to do this drilling, they removed the ingots one by one until they were no longer there. A pendulum was installed in the 1930s as a means of monitoring how much the tower was leaning. The correction to that lean by this method was such that the pendulum had swung back and was flat up against its case and could no longer move. Basically, the remedial work reduced the lean from 5.5 degrees to just under 4 degrees, which translates to a leaning from vertical of about 12 feet. So you can see they dropped about 6 feet off of it. Now, we jump ahead from the original article to July 2008 article from Civil Engineering, and we note that the article says that the project was a $40 million project. Compare this to the original article that made it a $25 million project. And the project was to keep the tower stable for 300 years as opposed to 200 years. So it is an interesting article, and it shows you the importance of knowing what your soil is and what kind of foundation you are going to be installing for the conditions that you find.